All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, there's a very thin line between self-belief and self-delusion. And self-realization can be a bitch, man. It really can. Especially if, as most of us do, you overinflate yourself or overestimate yourself in a certain field. Someone might think that they're better than they actually are when it comes to a certain ability or a gift that they believe that they have that they don't have to the capacity in which they think they have it. And I believe that that is the scenario that Kyrie Irving finds himself in right now. He believes that he's on the level of LeBron James and Kevin Durant, and he's not. So now the conundrum for him is going to be, do I try to stay in Boston and deal with this multitude of talent, even though the multitude is redundant because we have talent at the same position down to the third level? That's a problem. So Danny Ainge is going to have to execute a major trade to get rid of some of that redundant talent in order to make that team better, as well as re-signing Kyrie if he chooses to do so. Or does Kyrie say to himself, I'm going to strike out on my own again and try to team up with KD? Or does Kyrie say to himself, let me see if me and LeBron can orchestrate some type of situation or ritual where it can behoove the both of us to reconvene with one another without making it look too embarrassing for either one of us? Those are going to be the potential situations for Kyrie after this series is over, assuming that Boston loses this series, which I believe that they will. But just getting back to the point, self-realization can be a bitch, especially when you're hit smack dab in the face with the understanding that you're nowhere near as good as you thought you were. So anyway, they're going to talk about it and I'm going to chime in.
For me, the 22 shots, I should have shot 30. It really not great of a shooter. So I think
all that's cool. Kyrie Irving said, I'm that great of a shooter. I should have shot 30 times instead of 22 times when he was only 7 for 22. So what does that tell you right there? He does not understand his role on the team as a leader and a point guard. What a great leader does is sacrifice. A great leader sacrifices. Just because you can do something does not mean that you should. Just because you can do something well does not mean that you should do it all the time. Kyrie Irving does not understand that. It's very obvious that Kyrie has a lot of maturing to do.
I think that just the consistency of just going at it, staying aggressive is always going to put us in a great position.
Staying aggressive is fine as long as you're staying aggressive in an intelligent way. And you don't have that problem anywhere near to the level of a Russell Westbrook, but you do have that problem. Sometimes you can be a bit too talented for your own good. And that's an issue that many point guards in this current NBA have because they've all been given this green light. And sometimes, you run into games where you'll catch them on TV, whether it's Dame Lillard or Kyrie or Russell Westbrook, where they're taking way too many shots. Way too many shots. You've already been blessed with the task of being able to bring the ball up and initiate the offense. So the least that you can do is have your mind on empowering your teammates. Because when you empower your teammates, you're going to empower your team.
Now let's get you back to first take. Teams that go 3-1 in a best-of-7 series win 96% of the time. I know you like numbers, Max Kellerman, so Boston is in serious trouble.
Yep.
How much is Kyrie to blame for the Celtics' issues?
A lot. The Celtics got to the conference finals last year without Kyrie, and the whole question...
As soon as someone says something like that, I understand that they have no understanding of what they're talking about. He started off decent. He said that Kyrie does have a lot to do with the situation in Boston, and he does. But then he went on to try to harken back to last season when the Celtics got to the Eastern Conference Finals. That was an entirely different year, entirely different conference, with an entirely different talent level in the East last season. You cannot compare this season to last season. Coming into these playoffs, there were 4 teams that people thought to themselves, this team has a realistic chance to make it to the finals, if not possibly win the finals, even against the Warriors. If the Philadelphia 76ers, with a fully healthy Joel Embiid, were to have gotten to the finals and defeated the Golden State Warriors in 7 games, would people have been absolutely flabbergasted, like falling down on the floor shocked? No. You would have been surprised, but not falling down on the floor shocked. And you could say the same thing about Boston, Milwaukee, and Toronto. You could not have said that about any of those teams last season. All of the teams in the Eastern Conference are much better than they were last year. Other than maybe Boston, who I believe had better chemistry last season, even when Kyrie was in the lineup. This season, they had way too much talent at the same spot, the same position. I stated that coming into the season. Milwaukee is at least twice as good as they were last season, as is Toronto. Even if their regular season record might not have been any better than it was last season. You replace a top 25 to top 30 player in DeMar DeRozan with a top 2 or 3 player in the NBA in Kawhi Leonard. So you're going to see the dividends in the playoffs as we're seeing, where he's carrying the team and at times literally showing himself to be a one-man gang on par with some of the performances that we've seen in the past from Kobe and Michael Jordan. That's what Kawhi is doing. You never could have gotten that from DeMar DeRozan, who's a very good player, but he's nowhere near Kawhi Leonard. So we have Philly, we have Milwaukee with one of the MVP candidates. He should win the MVP, even though I think that he's going to get robbed, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. And in Toronto, you have the great Kawhi Leonard. You had none of that last season to threaten the Kyrie-less Boston Celtics. Remember, the Boston Celtics won 7 games last year with the Milwaukee Bucks. This is before they got the new coach Budenholzer and before they understood the importance of spreading the floor and playing great defense. So that team, if you were to transplant that team to this year, would have gotten probably swept in the first round by Milwaukee.
Question was, and Gordon Hayward, and the whole question was, how would they do with those guys? Now, because it changes the dynamic. Now, when you add players, especially a player of Kyrie's caliber, you say, come on, coach, come on, superstar. Don't tell me about chemistry. I know it's important. It's not that it's unimportant, but you got this far without that guy. Now you're adding him and losing nothing. You'll figure out the chemistry by the time the playoffs roll around. They haven't. They just haven't. And Stephen A. has said before the series started, the issue between Kyrie and the Greek Freak is that when Antetokounmpo is at his best, he lifts the team.
Because he's a great leader. That's why I picked Antetokounmpo to be the quote-unquote best player or number one player or the ambassador for the NBA for the next 10 years. Does he have the skill set offensively of a Kevin Durant? No. Is he the defensive mastermind of a Kawhi Leonard or even the all-around player of a Kawhi Leonard? Probably not. But his force of nature, as well as the fact that he does not offend his teammates with his leadership style, as well as the fact that he shows up for every game, Antetokounmpo is the player that I pick, who I nominate to assume the throne over the next 10 years.
Whereas the other players on the Celtics function better when Kyrie's not there. So Kyrie, in order to make them even better than they were without him, has to not only ball out of control, but has to do so that his contributions compensate for the fact that everybody else comes down. He's not on this Celtics team. It's not that Kyrie is incapable of doing that, I don't think. He dribbles the ball a lot. He scores a lot. And so guys sit around getting cold. That's what happens. They're less involved. You can blame it on the other players, and that's fair. It takes two. But without Kyrie, they function better as a unit. So Kyrie's excellence has to be so much better that it compensates for the decreased production from the entire unit. There's no way around it.
You also have to blame Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens has done a very poor job acclimating himself to actually having to coach stars or players that already have a name. It's easy for him to coach players straight out of college because that's who he was accustomed to coaching prior to assuming the position of head coach with the Boston Celtics. But he's shown that he's been a bit timid and fearful of stepping on the toes of many of the prominent players with the Celtics for whatever reason. Maybe he was worried that he and Kyrie might butt heads and that might lead Kyrie to lead the team. But as always in life, when you approach any situation with fear, especially relationships, the thing that you're trying to avoid, the thing that you're fearing is going to manifest itself because of the fear that you're showing. You always have to confront whatever it is that you're feeling inside or whatever it is that is affecting you from within. Because if you don't address it directly immediately, it's going to start to emanate down the line. And either way, you're not going to be able to avoid, whatever it is that's going to come. Whatever's going to come is going to come. So to make a long story short, Brad Stevens should have manned up, showed that he had a backbone, and told all those players in the Celtic locker room what their role was.
You got to point at him. I thought he was going to compensate for it. He hasn't done it so far.
I would appreciate if you do not interrupt me with my response about this, because I'm going to be the one that takes heat for this, not you.
Shoot.
On a national level. But let me be very, very clear. If you're talking about this series, I got no argument for you. Because I expected Kyrie Irving to be a hell of a lot better than somebody who's shooting less than 40% from the field and 24% from three-point range. That is awful. Kyrie Irving has not delivered the way I anticipated he would deliver for this series. But for the season, my attention is focused on two people. Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge.
I would agree with that, sir.
I'm not letting them off the hook. Brad Stevens, I'm incredibly fond of him. Bright young coach. But the bottom line is what he did to start out this season and what Danny Ainge did, because I can't believe that Brad Stevens did it on his own, considering the magician that Danny Ainge has proven to be as an executive. Danny Ainge definitely had a part to do with Gordon Hayward being inserted in that starting lineup.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, I've been saying that for months. It's obvious that Danny Ainge, as well as Brad Stevens, wanted Gordon Hayward to play because of the amount of money that they were paying him, and also to showcase him potentially maybe for an after the season trade for Anthony Davis. I thought that they would have been able to trade for Anthony Davis during the season, but brothers reminded me that they would not have been allowed to trade for Anthony Davis under the Rose rule. So I think that they were playing Gordon Hayward throughout this season to make him a part of a deal, maybe after the season for Anthony Davis. Either way, Danny Ainge is always thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. And I do believe that that is why they were playing Gordon Hayward so many minutes.
Now, I want everybody to understand where I'm coming from here.
Go ahead, nigga.
Gordon Hayward started at Butler. He played for Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens is his guy. That's his boy, all right? You're Danny Ainge. You go out, you give Gordon Hayward $130 million, okay? It's the nastiest injury, one of the nastiest injuries that I've ever seen that he suffered. It would be one thing, Max, where players, young players with egos, simply think they're better than you. If you talk to Steven Jackson, who used to play with the Spurs, he thought he was better than Manu Ginobili and that Popovich played favorite, stuff like that. You can talk with that about him one day. But neither of them were injured. That's just competitive fervor going on. In the case of Gordon Hayward, he clearly was not healthy. He clearly was not ready. He clearly was somebody that did not belong on the basketball court, arguably, and damn sure did not belong in the starting lineup.
Stephen A. Smith, I agree with all that. But we also have to understand where Danny Ainge is coming from. Danny Ainge is in a situation where he signs Kyrie Irving, or he trades for Kyrie Irving, and he signs Gordon Hayward. And he says to himself, these are going to be our two linchpins to help grow or mature the younger players on our team. We'll probably win about 52, 53 games next season, maybe compete in the playoffs into the second or third round. Gordon Hayward goes down in the first game of the season last year. Kyrie Irving leads the team to some amazing start, to the point where they're actually starting to get championship aspirations until Kyrie Irving goes down. Then the young kids are able to advance 3 rounds, 3 levels in the Eastern Conference playoffs. So that changes the expectations for everything, not only from the front office and the coach, but also from the players. You have young players who are saying to themselves, we've been able to prove our mettle over the course of this past season, and we deserve an equal opportunity to start, not understanding that that is not how the NBA works. This is not junior high school, it's not high school, it's not college. It's not just about merit, it's also about the bottom line. And the bottom line in professional sports is not winning, it is money. It's money. That's why championship teams have been broken up. Championship teams have been broken up over money. So that shows you right there that money trumps winning. And I think that it was very traumatizing for many of those young players to come to that conclusion after a while. That you actually can get playing time because you're getting 8 figures and you yourself are still on your rookie deal. So they can afford to sit you even if you're the better player or you feel like you're the better player. So that's where all the acrimony first started at.
You are fresh off an Eastern Conference Finals berth, Game 7, 48 minutes away from an NBA championship, trip to the NBA Finals, rather. And the next season, this man is starting ahead of you. I was in the Boston Celtics locker room weeks ago before the regular season had ended when they played Philadelphia. To tell you that Jason Tatum looked absolutely depressed about being a Boston Celtic.
Well, anyone can see that because Jason Tatum was reading too many of his press clippings. He was spending too much time on the internet reading how everybody was calling him the next Kobe Bryant and the next Michael Jordan and the next George Gervin. Like, he bought into all that bullshit. Averaging 16 points a game last year, he thought he was going to come into this season averaging 32 points a game. Then he goes and works out with Kobe in the offseason. So how could you have expected him to come back into camp with a team mindset after working out with the damn Black Mamba?
I didn't talk to him. I'm just talking about how he looked. It was so sad to see him when you compare that to how he looked a year ago. Jaylen Brown, a professional.
Last year, he was just happy to be on the team.
Didn't talk to them about this, but looking at them and how down they were, they couldn't wait for the season to be over because that's how bad things had gotten. Where does that come from? And if you are Brad Stevens and you are Danny Ainge, and to know that you got two young thoroughbreds who started together and viewed themselves as the future, and to make that call is egregious. Remember, Max, they all know, as much of a headache that Kyrie can be at times, they know he can ball. In the case of Gordon Hayward, strictly because of his injury, you knew he couldn't. And to put him in that lineup, you disrupted the whole team from the start of the season. I'm making the case they have never, ever recovered.
I agree with that. But once again, Stephen A. Smith, you had to know that was going to happen. You had to know that Gordon Hayward was going to get pronounced minutes, not only because of how much money he was getting paid, but also to market him to other teams across the NBA to show them that he had fully recovered from the injury.
And a byproduct of that is seeing what we're seeing right now from this team. They're not a team. They're just a bunch of individual parts. And as a result, they're going to go home in 5 games because of it.
I agree with that.
Are not a team. They're just a bunch of individuals wearing the same uniform.
The problem with what you're saying, and look, those are the two pieces that had to be added. Kyrie Irving, Gordon Hayward, how would the team respond? Poorly. And I'm not going to, what you're saying, there's truth to it. Gordon Hayward had too many minutes early. I think Brad Stevens thought he needed the passing in the starting lineup.
By the way, I think he's minus 49 in this series.
I think Hayward's been terrible in this series.
Stephen A. Smith, I would bet that a lot of players are minus 25 and up.
But I think Stevens thought
on the Celtics I'm talking about. It's very obvious, especially with the way in which they've been blown out the last 3 games. I'm sure that most of their players are minus 25 and worse.
Thought he needed the passing in the starting lineup. He trusted him, as you mentioned, the Butler, the fact that they were there, the fact that Hayward is a veteran and some of these guys are young, up and coming. I get it. He made a mistake. I agree with that. But that's not really the issue on this team. The real issue on this team, however the players think that, they feel about it, my problem with your position is you have a religious point of view about it. In other words, an undisprovable hypothesis. I won't be able to prove you wrong, and I'll show you what I mean.
That sounds like something that atheists say when they get frustrated and they're back and forth with someone who believes in the idea of God. Oh, you're coming with an undisprovable concept. All this blah, 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 bloggity, blah.
There's going to be a good test case to see who's right about this, you or me. Let's see how they function as a team next year, because Kyrie's out of here. You
don't know that. You never know. Kyrie Irving is going to come to an impasse. Because does he want to come back to the Boston Celtics and potentially finish what he started? Or does he want to leave and seek out his fortunes elsewhere without the promise of joining a team as talented as the one in Boston, especially if he's able to get a promise from Danny Ainge that Danny is going to trade away some of their redundant talent in an attempt to acquire Anthony Davis. It would not surprise me if Kyrie Irving takes his time trying to discern and decipher where he wants to go, especially if he receives a promise from Danny Ainge that they're going to trade for Anthony Davis. I think that Kyrie is going to wait on Anthony Davis in Boston before he makes any moves.
I'll bet you Hayward's not, right? If Kyrie's gone and Hayward's not, my prediction is they'll function very well as a team without Kyrie next year. Now, you might sit there and say, well, okay, Max, Hayward had a year to get better, and so now he's a baller, and so it's a little different. And it will be a little different. But what you will notice next year is when you take Kyrie out, everyone else is going to get more involved. So we're going to have a good way to test this hypothesis next year. And if you're going to sit there and say, well, no, that can't be tested, then there's nothing I can say. Then that's just the way you feel.
That's fair. But my response to that, in terms of your hypothesis, would be point 1. They couldn't give Gordon Hayward away for a box of cookies right now.
I'm sure they couldn't. But they're going to package him.
Not right now.
I disagree with that.
They could. Not right now. I said not right.
Not by himself, but as a part of a package, they can move him.
Not right now. Listen, I like him as a player when healthy. I'm not questioning anything about Gordon Hayward. It's only because of his injury. But they couldn't give him away for a box of cookies right now.
Right.
They've got, and the dollars. You can appreciate that. The low value of play compared to the dollars that it would cost you. Couldn't give him away for a box of cookies right now. That's number 1. Number two, and more importantly, Max, last point. You're talking about how they'll be better and what have you. What I'm saying to you is this. You look at these guys. The whole premise of my argument is that somebody that clearly wasn't ready was put into play at the expense of two dudes who were.
Right, but Steve, you keep saying that. What did you really want Danny Ainge to do? What did you think he was going to do? Okay, so we're just going to let Gordon Hayward get better by sitting on the end of the bench. No. They were going to try to build him back up to be a 25-minute per game player at the very least. It failed. And it also alienated many of their other more talented younger players. It happens. They were placed in a position that they did not anticipate, especially after that horrific injury.
And you messed them up. So they could be better next year.
But look what
they
happened.
They could be better next year. But what did you do to them now?
You're also making an argument about this entire season. We're talking about this series. Where's Kyrie? Like, he's not playing well enough to make up for that.
That's what Aaron Rodgers was asking Paul Pierce.
I have no defense for Kyrie in this
Controlling the truth a little bit on that one.
Right.
Listen, maybe I'll go into Milwaukee for the first time in my life.
I have no defense for Kyrie in this series. I have no defense.
Giannis is...
You definitely cannot defend Kyrie Irving. And a lot of gloss has come off of this brother over the course of this season, unfortunately for him. So we'll see what happens. Peace.